Hello there, I'm Nathan Reed, a 26-year-old architectural designer, and here's something unbelievable. I've become intimately involved with my former girlfriend's mother. Sounds absolutely insane, doesn't it? If you were in my position, you'd probably dismiss this entirely. Nevertheless, this tale starts quite ordinarily during what seemed like just another unremarkable stormy evening. Raindrops cascaded down subway windows as I sat hunched over, awaiting the final train homeward. An entire day of draining labor left my limbs aching and thoughts scattered. 8 months following my separation from Sarah Martinez, I still hadn't truly recovered from that devastating emptiness. Ending things with someone who'd promised forever is challenging enough. But when the justification becomes insufficient success, inadequate wealth, the wound cuts deeper than mere ego. I trudged along the recognizable pathway, hoping to reach my tiny flat. My only desire involved collapsing onto the couch, streaming gentle blues, and allowing the downpour to ease me into slumber. However, everything shifted when I discovered my apartment door ajar. My pulse quickened. I remained certain I'd secured it before departing for the office. Intuition compelled me to grip my portfolio tighter and push through the entrance. Golden illumination from the living area spilled outward, and there upon the well-known charcoal settee sat a figure. Before her rested a steaming teacup. I stood motionless. "Eleanor," I gasped. The woman rotated around. Eleanor Ellie Martinez, Sarah's mother. The 50-year-old woman regarded me with exhaustion mixed with bewilderment. "Apologies, Nathan," she spoke, her tone hoarse yet tender. "I realize this seems abrupt. I simply required a peaceful location to decompress." She displayed a gleaming silver key. "Sarah provided this for emergencies. I never anticipated retaining it, yet today I utilized it. I hadn't relaxed my vigilance. My heart continued racing, not from terror, but from this incredible circumstance. How long have you been waiting here?" "Not extensively," she smiled weakly, her gaze fixed upon the tea. "I prepared it myself. I trust you don't object." I set down my drawing tube and stepped closer. Numerous questions swirled through my mind. Why was my ex-girlfriend's mother present? Why tonight? What had occurred? "What happened?" I inquired. Eleanor sighed, her shoulders drooping. "Sarah and I experienced another dispute. She expressed things I could no longer endure hearing. I refused to return home in that environment. Therefore, I came here." Sarah's name caused my heart to ache. I stood observing her, the woman who'd questioned me during family gatherings, who'd smiled warmly when I discussed my design projects, now sitting within my cold, vacant apartment. I nodded subtly. "It's acceptable. Just somewhat unexpected." She tilted her head, her lips moving slightly. "I'll depart immediately if you prefer." I shook my head. "You should remain. It's unpleasant weather outside." We settled down. The atmosphere remained quiet, but not uncomfortable. The sound of precipitation tapping against the glass door, the subtle tea fragrance mingling with fresh timber scents throughout the apartment. I observed the woman before me, unfamiliar yet recognizable. During that instant, the hollowness within me diminished slightly. That stormy evening, I never could have imagined this chance encounter would lead to circumstances I'd never envisioned throughout my existence. I, Nathan Reed, would become connected to my former girlfriend's mother. I pulled up a chair and positioned myself across from her. Outside, rainfall continued steadily, as though the entire metropolis were submerged in frigid whispers. Ellie wrapped her fingers around her teacup, her eyes concentrated on the ascending steam. After an extended moment, she spoke quietly. "Sarah claimed I was overly traditional. She insisted I didn't comprehend her ambitions." I remained silent. The name sliced through my heart like a blunt blade. "She declared," Ellie continued, "that an intelligent, driven woman like herself deserved partnership with someone accomplished, prosperous, and powerful." She paused. "She mentioned you were squandering your youth by remaining attached to her father, a high school educator with minimal resources. She refused to repeat the same error." She hesitated. Her eyes conveyed, "Nathan, she discussed you." I inhaled deeply, attempting to maintain vocal composure. "I suppose so." Memories flooded my consciousness. The final evening with Sarah, the apartment lights dimmed, the pizza container unfinished, and her sitting opposite me, eyes gleaming but voice arctic. "You're decent, Nathan, truly. But decent isn't sufficient. I require more. I need someone who can provide the lifestyle I deserve, the residence, the vehicle, the prestige. You haven't reached that level, and I cannot wait." I was speechless. I was merely 26, several years beyond college, still constructing my career incrementally. I loved her, believing our emotions would sustain us through difficulties, but Sarah looked at me resolutely without hesitation. It felt like I'd simultaneously lost a body part and been liberated from an invisible burden. There was bitterness, there was anguish, but somewhere existed slight relief. I returned to the present, looking at the woman before me, Sarah's mother. She carried the same pain, but from a different perspective. "I'm sorry," Ellie said, shaking her head slightly. "She shouldn't have spoken such harsh words. She was too young, too impulsive." "I'm fine," I replied, my voice low. "Actually, after hearing that, I understand. Perhaps we weren't destined for each other." A moment of silence passed. The sound of rain outside the window mingled with the kettle hissing in the kitchen. I stood up, poured more hot water, made fresh tea. Placing a cup before her, I said, "Drink some more. You'll rest better." Ellie looked up, her eyes softening. "Thank you, Nathan. You're always considerate." The simple compliment made me slightly confused. I scratched my head, smiled awkwardly, then stood and retrieved the thin blanket from the closet. I arranged space on the sofa, added more pillows, and adjusted the lighting to be dimmer. "You can sleep here tonight. I have my own room. Don't worry." She looked around the apartment at me. "I've troubled you excessively." "No. If you feel better here, then stay." She nodded slightly. When I handed her the blanket, our fingers touched. It was only a fleeting moment, but I could clearly feel the warmth spreading to my palm. Ellie also paused, then quickly took the blanket, avoiding my eyes. I returned to my room, but sleep eluded me. The sound of rain continued falling, and I knew right in the small apartment there was someone else tossing and turning like me. We didn't exchange another word, but the silence of the night became an invisible thread that brought us slightly closer together. I couldn't have imagined that this small moment would be the beginning of everything that would follow. I awakened as the first sunbeams filtered through the curtains. The rain had ceased, leaving an unusual silence. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and immediately recalled last night's image. Ellie sitting on the sofa, embracing the blanket I'd given her, her eyes heavy from the argument with her daughter. Perhaps I'd imagined it, but no. The faint aroma of coffee drifted into the room from the kitchen, drawing me from bed. I stepped out, and as I'd suspected, Ellie was standing before the kitchenette. She wore her pale shirt again, her hair slightly disheveled, but her eyes were focused as she flipped a piece of toast. There were already several eggs, butter, and 2 steaming coffee cups on the table. "Good morning," she said, slightly embarrassed. I paused momentarily, the sight making my heart sink. How long had it been since I'd seen anyone in the apartment prepare breakfast besides myself? "Good morning," I replied, trying to keep my voice casual. "Here's your coffee." She placed a cup before me. I sat down and took the cup. Warmth spread through my palms. It was strange. I was accustomed to morning emptiness, just hastily made sandwiches and machine coffee. But today, everything suddenly felt like genuine family. Ellie sat down to spread butter on a bread slice and smiled slightly. "It's been ages since I made breakfast for anyone other than myself. It feels better than expected." I sipped coffee, nodded. It's been ages since I had someone to share breakfast with. We both laughed softly, but genuinely. That laughter seemed to dispel last night's awkwardness. After cleaning up, Ellie removed a familiar silver key from her bag. She placed it on the table, gently pushing it towards me. "This? I should return it to you. I have no reason to keep it anymore." I looked at the key, then at her. For a moment, I saw a flicker of concern in her eyes, as if she'd reminded herself that her presence in my life was an accident, an exception that shouldn't last. I pushed the key back gently. "Keep it." Ellie looked up slightly, surprised. "Keep it? But why?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe there will come a time when you need a place to rest like last night. Who knows?" She looked at me for a moment, her eyes softening. I saw a faint pink tinge to her cheeks, and she took the key back, fidgeting with it in her hand. "You're strange, Nathan, but thanks." The atmosphere was tense for a moment, then suddenly warmer. Not just a guest and a host, not quite an ex-girlfriend's mother and a heartbroken boyfriend. At that moment, I saw only 2 people, a 50-year-old woman with experience and a 26-year-old man lost, finding slight peace in each other. When she left, the sunlight had spread across the street. I stood at the door, watching her figure disappear, a strange feeling rising in my heart. Not exactly love, nor simply pity, just a rare warmth that I couldn't remember the last time I had it. The key in her hand glinted in the sunlight, and I knew the emptiness of this apartment had just had a new crack for light to enter. One evening, as I was busy editing a sketch on my laptop, the doorbell rang. I looked at the clock. It was almost 8 o'clock. Rarely did anyone visit my apartment at this hour. When I opened the door, I saw Ellie standing there clutching a white cardboard box. "Sorry I'm late," she said, smiling somewhat sheepishly. "I thought you might need some lemon tart." I was surprised for a moment, then laughed. "Lemon tart? That sounds very French. At least it's better than fruitcake, right?" she replied, her eyes sparkling with humor. I invited her in. We sat down at the small dining table, and I carefully cut into the tart. The sweet and tangy scent of lemons, mixed with the fragrant scent of vanilla, filled the apartment. Just smelling it made my stomach growl. "This tart is delicious," I said after taking my first bite. "I think I'll appreciate lemon tart much more from now on." She chuckled softly, then leisurely enjoyed her piece of dessert. The atmosphere gradually quieted down, leaving only the sporadic sound of rain outside the glass window and the sweet scent of the cake. "At the library," Ellie began, "I often see young couples. They frequently come to borrow books and sit reading beside each other. Sometimes they don't speak to each other, just quietly in the same space. I like to observe that. It reminds me of my younger years." I leaned back in my chair listening. "I never thought of libraries as romantic places." "Oh, very romantic," she confirmed. "Books are like small bridges. They connect two souls without language. People don't need to talk excessively, just turn the pages together." I nodded. "Maybe, but I only see buildings, houses, bridges, roads. Being an architect makes me look at bricks, glass, concrete everywhere I go. It's a kind of bridge." She looked at me, her eyes soft. "You create space for others to live, love, and grow. Isn't that a way to connect?" I was taken aback. No one had ever discussed my job that way. To my colleagues, it was just deadlines, contracts, profits. But to her, it was seen as something more human. I felt my throat warm up. After a pause, Ellie lowered her voice. "My husband died 7 years ago. He taught high school history. Gentle, passionate about his students, but never had much money. Sarah always blamed me for choosing someone like that. She thought that marriage imprisoned me." She paused, her eyes fixed on the space before her. I noticed her hand shaking slightly as she held the spoon. "But the truth is," she continued, "I have never regretted it. We were not rich, but I always had someone by my side. Now alone in an empty house, I understand what it means to be lonely after 50. Sometimes I feel like a book left on a shelf, covered in dust, rarely touched." I clenched my spoon in my hand. Those words reminded me of myself. 26 years old, but sometimes feeling lost, invisible in the big city. I understand the feeling of being considered not enough, not rich enough, not good enough, not enough to keep someone. I looked up, meeting her eyes. In those eyes, I did not see judgment like Sarah did, but sympathy. We were both lonely in our own way, each carrying a void that was hard for anyone to understand. "I think," I said slowly, "maybe it's not about whether the other person is rich or poor, successful or not. It's about having someone to sit next to you, even if they're not talking." Ellie smiled softly, a smile warmer than any light in the apartment. "Yes." We fell silent again, but it wasn't a heavy silence. It was like a thin blanket covering the space, carrying with it a sense of peace. As I folded the box of cookies, she stood up to leave. Before she walked out the door, she turned back to look at me, her eyes wanting to say something more, but then she just nodded. I nodded, and the door closed, leaving the scent of lemons and vanilla in the air. That night, I sat in the apartment for a long time, and for the first time since breaking up with Sarah, I didn't feel completely alone. After dinner, I stood clearing the table when Ellie grabbed the stack of bowls from her hands. "Let me do it," she said, her eyes determined. "You cooked. I can't let you do everything." I laughed, shrugging. "Okay, but the faucet at the sink is slightly stiff. It needs to be turned more gently." She nodded, rolling up the sleeves of her cream silk shirt. I leaned against the counter, arranging my knives and cutting boards while keeping an eye on her. The small apartment suddenly had a strange sound. The sound of dishes clanking, the sound of running water. Simple, warm, almost making me forget I was alone. Then suddenly, crack. A dry metallic sound rang out. Immediately after, the faucet turned on, spraying directly at Ellie. She backed away in panic, but the water still splashed. "Ellie!" I rushed forward quickly, turning the valve under the sink. It took me several flustered seconds to stop the water flow. The kitchen was wet. The floor was puddled with water. Ellie stood panting, her silk blouse clinging to her body, hugging curves I had never noticed before. I froze. My heart was pounding. In the dim yellow light, the thin wet silk was stuck to her skin, revealing lines that made me speechless. I knew I should look away, but my eyes were locked. Ellie blushed quickly, holding her arms across her chest. "Oh my, sorry. Her voice trembled, a mixture of embarrassment and panic. I was startled, turned around, grabbed a towel from the shelf and handed it to her. "Quick, wipe it. I didn't think the faucet would be this broken." She took it hastily, covering her shirt. Still, her every movement made my heart race. I tried to take deep breaths, forcing myself to focus. "Don't look," she whispered, her face flushed. I didn't mean to," I stammered, and then hurried into the room to get my hoodie. Turning back, I handed it to her. "Put this on. Yours is soaked." Ellie took it, her eyes still averted. She turned away, pulling the hoodie over herself. When the dry fabric covered her, I felt myself breathing a sigh of relief. A long moment of silence followed. Only the dripping of the broken faucet and the pounding of my heart could be heard. Finally, Ellie turned back. She held her hoodie tightly, her face still flushed. "I'm so clumsy. Sorry for the trouble." I shook my head, smiling awkwardly. "No, actually I should be apologizing. I should have fixed the faucet long ago." We looked at each other and then laughed, an awkward, relieved laugh. The shame that had just come turned into a strange kind of connection. We were both aware that some boundary had been crossed, a new and indescribable layer of emotion. That night, as I lay in bed, the image of Ellie in her wet silk blouse kept replaying in my mind. I didn't allow myself to think too far ahead, but I couldn't deny it. Besides our companionship, there was something else between us, a sexual attraction, sudden and powerful, like a fountain of water gushing out of a broken faucet. And I knew that from now on, things would never be simple again. After the accident with the faucet, there was an indescribable change between Ellie and me. We didn't mention it again, but I felt an invisible thread that drew us closer together. I started going to the library where she worked. At first it was for very reasonable reasons, borrowing reference books, looking for documents for a project, but later on the reasons didn't seem important anymore. I just wanted to see her. Ellie often stood behind the counter, smiling gently when I appeared. The library was usually quiet, but every time she and I talked, that silence turned into a private space, as if the whole world was wrapped up in the bookshelves. We told each other trivial stories. I complained about the pressure of work, about the drawings that were revised over and over again. She shared her stories about aging, her health concerns, and the feeling of emptiness when she came home after a long day. Those seemingly small things, when shared together, turned into comfort. One afternoon, I volunteered to stay behind to help her rearrange a new row of books. She stood on the small steps while I brought the books up below. The library was quiet. Only the sound of our soft conversation could be heard. When I reached out to hand over the thick novel, her hand accidentally touched mine. The touch was light and fleeting, but I immediately stopped. It seemed like she did too. Her eyes were slightly surprised. Her fingers quickly contracted. That moment was brief, but enough for me to feel my heart skip a beat. And in Ellie's confused gaze, I realized she wasn't completely indifferent. That evening, when I left the library, I kept remembering the warm feeling at my fingertips. For the first time, I dared to admit to myself that there was something between us that went beyond the boundary of friendship. And I had a hunch Ellie was starting to realize it too. I decided to invite Ellie to dinner. The idea came naturally, as if it were meant to happen. After the library meetings, I wanted to give her a different setting. Not a workspace, not a casual meeting, but a proper meal, just the two of us. I had been preparing for a long time, going to the supermarket to buy wine, vegetables, some chicken for roasting. I was not a good cook, but I wanted the dinner to be neat enough to make her feel important. When Ellie arrived, she was wearing a simple pale blue dress and a thin shawl. Her eyes were slightly surprised when she saw the table was set with candles and wine glasses. "Nathan, you did all this?" she asked softly, smiling at the same time, surprised and touched. "Of course," I said, trying to hide my nervousness. "You deserve a nice dinner." We sat across from each other. As I poured the wine, the candlelight fell on her face, highlighting the wrinkles at the corners of her eyes, not making her look older, but making her look more experienced and gentle. The meal was more cozy than I expected. Ellie ate and told stories about her youth, long trips with her husband, family dinners when Sarah was young. I listened, feeling both close and heartbroken. While clearing the table, Ellie's eyes suddenly stopped on a small shelf by the wall. I looked at it. An old photo frame, In the photo, Sarah and I were standing next to each other, smiling brightly on a trip to the beach. Ellie was silent, her hand gently squeezing the napkin. I sensed a brief torment in her eyes. Perhaps she was wondering, was it a mistake for me to sit here enjoying dinner with the boy who used to be my daughter's boyfriend? I walked over, picked up the photo frame, and gently placed it face down. Sorry, I forgot to leave it here. She shook her head, her voice low. No, it's not your fault. It's just looking at it reminds me that things are more complicated than we think. The room was quiet for a moment, but then I held my breath, poured more wine, and steered the conversation in another direction. After dinner, we were in no hurry to say goodbye. I turned on some soft jazz, and the apartment was filled with soft sounds. Ellie sat on the sofa, the wine making her cheeks flush. We talked late into the night about her favorite books, about the buildings I wanted to build in the future. Each story seemed to add another piece to the puzzle that helped us understand each other better. There were moments of silence, but not awkward silence. It was a warm silence, as if we both felt safe sitting next to each other. When the clock struck midnight, Ellie stood up. I should go, she said, her voice wistful. I walked her to the door. Before she left, she turned back to look at me, her eyes sparkling under the hallway light. For a moment, I saw in her gaze not just gratitude, but something deeper, fragile, and hard to name. When the door closed, I stood still for a long time. That dinner was more than just a meal. It was like a milestone where we were no longer just friends. Behind the smile, I clearly felt both Ellie and I were entering dangerous territory, but there was no turning back. I had just returned from work. When the doorbell rang, still tired, I went to open it without thinking, and as soon as the door opened, my heart stopped. Sarah. She stood there, her blonde hair tied back, her eyes bright but serious. After nearly 8 months of not seeing her, I thought I had gotten used to her absence, but now, in just a moment, all the memories rushed back like a cold wind. Sarah. I tried to keep my voice calm. You came here for what? She looked around the apartment as if searching for some trace. Is Mom here? I was stunned. Why do you ask? Sarah crossed her arms, her voice sharp. I know Mom comes to your place often. I want to know how often she comes here. The room suddenly felt cramped. I took a breath and slowly replied, She has come a few times, but not in the way you think. Sarah pursed her lips, her eyes flashing with a mixture of jealousy, confusion, and anger. You know, I used to think you weren't enough, not successful enough, not enough for me to bet on the future. But looking at Mom, I haven't seen her this happy since Dad died. It makes me conflicted. I sat down on the sofa, rubbing my forehead. The words felt like an old knife, but also like a rare admission. Sarah moved closer, her gaze softening slightly. What are you and Mom to each other? I looked up, looking straight into her eyes. We have nothing to hide. We just found peace in each other. You know, I lost a part of myself when we broke up. Your mom was lonely for so long. Maybe that's why we understand each other better. Sarah bit her lip, not answering right away. I saw her tremble slightly as if she was struggling with herself. I don't want to believe it, she finally whispered. The thought of my mother coming to you makes me uncomfortable, but also, if it makes her happy, I don't want to stop it. I fell silent. In that moment, I saw a vulnerability in Sarah that I had rarely seen before. She was always strong, always demanding, always setting high standards. But now, in front of the story between me and her mother, Sarah became a child struggling between jealousy and love. I never wanted to hurt you or your family, I said slowly. What happened between Ellie and me? It wasn't planned. It just happened as a way for both of us to live more comfortably. You don't have to accept it right away, but I hope you understand. No one betrays anyone on purpose. Sarah looked at me for a long time, then nodded slightly as if she still didn't know how to feel. I need time, she whispered, turning to walk out the door. When the door closed, I sank down on the sofa. My heart was still pounding. Tonight, I knew everything had changed, not just between Sarah and me, but between Ellie and me. From now on, we would no longer be able to hide behind a layer of simple peace. Sarah's questioning gaze made everything more real than ever. One weekend afternoon, Ellie and I went for a walk in the park near our house. It was late autumn. The maple leaves were red, slowly falling, forming a soft carpet under our feet. We walked slowly, not caring about the destination, just wanting to enjoy the silence. Ellie kept her hands in her coat pockets, her shoulders slightly hunched. Nathan, sometimes I feel so foolish. I'm 50. If someone saw us walking like this, what would they think? I stopped, looking at her. They would think this is a graceful woman walking with a lucky man. She laughed, but her laugh was bitter. You know what I mean. Society doesn't accept this easily. People will whisper, they will judge, and most of all, I'm afraid, I can't give you what you deserve at your age. I slowed down, searching for the words. Ellie, I had a relationship with Sarah. She wanted me to be successful, rich, worthy. I tried to satisfy her, but in the end, she still left me. At that time, I realized that what I needed was not external recognition. What I needed was someone who truly understood me, who listened to me, and I found that in you. Ellie turned, her eyes trembling. You really think so? Of course. You don't judge me by my bank account or my reputation. You only care if I'm tired, if I'm well fed, if I feel at peace. That's what I cherish the most. She fell silent, her face torn. The wind blew, carrying the pungent smell of dry leaves. A leaf fell on her shoulder. I gently removed it. She looked up at me, her eyes shining with something soft and fragile. I'm used to being alone, Ellie whispered. Sometimes I think I'm not worthy of being loved anymore. But you... She paused, as if afraid that saying more would cross the line. I smiled slightly and replied softly, No one is too old to be loved, Ellie, especially when that person is worthy. She lowered her head, and I saw her cheeks turn pink. We continued walking. The distance between us seemed to narrow. I didn't hold her hand, but just walking side by side like that, I felt strangely warm inside. That day, I knew clearly our feelings had gone beyond the initial awkwardness. It was becoming deeper, and Ellie was also gradually opening her heart to receive it. Ellie called me one cool afternoon. Her voice was soft, but slightly nervous. Nathan, tonight, would you like to come over for dinner? I think it's time I cooked for you. I nodded before she finished. Only when I hung up did I realize my heart was beating faster than usual. Ellie's house was small and quiet. When I arrived, the smell of fried onions and red wine was already wafting through the kitchen. She wore a plaid apron, her hair tied up high, looking both simple and strangely graceful. I'm going to make roast chicken with red wine sauce, she said, her hands quickly cutting vegetables. My husband used to love this dish. I stepped closer, rolling up my sleeves. Let me help. I'm not good at it, but at least I know how to cut carrots. She laughed, a clear and warm laugh that brightened the kitchen. So we cooked together. I washed the vegetables, she marinated the meat. I stirred the sauce. She tasted it and wrinkled her nose playfully. While washing the dishes, I happened to stand close to her, only an arm's length away. The warmth from her body made me shy. I turned to ask just as she looked up. Our eyes met. Time seemed to stand still. The sound of the pots clattering, the smell of wine, the yellow light on the ceiling, all became the backdrop for that lingering look. I saw Ellie's cheeks turn pink, her lips slightly pursed. I was embarrassed but did not turn away. Instead, my hand moved slightly, touching the back of her hand. This time, I did not pull back. My hand grasped hers, trembling slightly but firmly. Ellie stiffened slightly, her eyes wavering. Nathan, she called softly, her voice seeming to match my heartbeat. I'm scared. What will people say? I'm almost a lifetime older than you. I squeezed her hand gently, looking straight into her eyes. You can be scared, but you have to know that you've never made me feel this peaceful, and I've never met anyone who made me want to stop for so long. Her eyes welled up with tears. She sighed softly, then whispered, I'm scared, but I've never felt this peaceful either. In that moment, I knew the biggest barrier between us had been shaken. We were no longer just two people sharing loneliness, but two hearts trying to touch each other, regardless of age or the gaze of others. When the food was done, we sat down at the table. Dinner went on as usual, but my hands and hers occasionally touched under the table, and neither of us withdrew them. That evening, when I left, Ellie saw me to the door. There was no kiss, no overly intimate gesture. Just the handshake that lasted a few seconds longer, and the gentle look in her eyes were enough for me to know a new door in her heart had opened. I arrived at Ellie's house late one afternoon, intending to bring her some fresh flowers, but before I could knock, I heard an argument inside. Ellie's voice, usually gentle, was high-pitched and trembling, and the other voice I recognized immediately. Sarah. I stopped dead, clutching the bouquet, my heart heavy. I can't believe it, Mom, Sarah shouted. What are you doing? Nathan was my boyfriend. Did you think about how I felt? Ellie replied, her voice also filled with emotion. Do you think I don't feel bad? I've asked myself that 100 times, but I don't understand. I've been single for a long time, and Nathan... Nathan what? Sarah interrupted. He's not enough for me, and he certainly isn't enough for you. You should have found a successful man who could take care of you in your old age, not—" Her voice caught, then came out like a knife. "Steal from your daughter." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. From inside the house, Ellie was silent for a long time, then spoke. "Daughter," she said slowly, "you want someone rich and successful. That's your choice, and I don't blame you. But I don't need that anymore. I just need someone who is sincere, someone who makes me feel at peace when I'm with him. That's the difference between us." The room fell silent. I imagined Sarah standing there, not believing her ears. "Mom," Sarah finally spoke, her voice softer, less sharp. "Do you really believe Nathan can make you happy?" Ellie sighed, but her voice was firm. "I don't need him to bring me the world. I just need him to sit next to me. Listen, care. Don't you see? Since I met Nathan, I've smiled more, been more true to myself. That's happiness." I heard a chair being pulled back, then footsteps. Sarah must have sat down. There was no more shouting, just slow, heavy breathing. I knew I shouldn't eavesdrop, but I couldn't move. I stood outside the door, my heart pounding, waiting. After a while, Sarah's voice rang out, softer. "Maybe I was too selfish. I only thought about what I wanted without seeing that you also needed to live for yourself." I was momentarily surprised. It was the first time I'd heard Sarah speak in that tone. Not arrogant, not imposing, but sincere. Ellie didn't answer right away. Then I heard a chair creak. Perhaps she had sat down next to her daughter. "You're not losing me, Sarah, and I don't want to take away your happiness, but you have to accept that I have the right to choose my own happiness." Silence. Then a small sob. Sarah was crying. I let the bouquet fall, my hands shaking. For a moment I saw a glimmer of hope. Maybe Sarah finally understood. When Ellie opened the door, she was surprised to see me standing in the hallway. Her eyes moist, but calm. Behind her, Sarah was still sitting in the living room, her face hidden behind her loose hair. She looked at me, nodded slightly. I understood immediately. The biggest storm had just passed. And although there were many challenges ahead, at least for now, Ellie had said the most important thing. She deserved to be happy in her own way. Dinner that night was in my small apartment. Ellie wanted us all to sit down, and I knew it wouldn't be easy. I cooked something simple: pumpkin soup, grilled chicken, green salad. When Sarah walked in, her eyes were still weary, and I didn't know whether to laugh or stay silent. We sat down at the table. The atmosphere was thick and heavy at first. The sound of knives and forks hitting plates was so loud, it made me cringe. I was about to say something when Ellie spoke first. "Remember when you were in 5th grade, Sarah?" She chuckled, her eyes on her daughter. "You insisted on getting a cat. Then a week later you forgot about it and it ran all over the house. Your dad had to climb up on the roof to get it down." Sarah looked up, slightly surprised. Then the corners of her lips lifted. "You remember that too?" "Yes," Ellie nodded. The whole family burst out laughing. You were sobbing and apologizing, then begging for a dog. Then my dad said, "Sarah, you'll never stop wanting so many things at once." The whole table burst out laughing. I laughed too, seeing the wall of tension crack for the first time. Sarah shook her head, her eyes shining with a rare softness. That story, so simple, was like a bridge. We started talking more, talking about shared memories, even small things like the cakes Ellie used to bake, or the time Sarah and I argued over watching different genres of movies. Laughter filled the void, making dinner less of a confrontation and more of a strange but truly warm family moment. When the cleaning was done, Sarah sat back for a moment, her eyes more mature than usual. "I can't promise that I'll accept everything easily, but I see you're happy, and Nathan isn't the same anymore. Maybe I'll get used to it." That wasn't a complete acceptance, but it was enough to make Ellie and me feel relieved. After Sarah left, Ellie and I walked outside. The city night was bright with lights. The rain had just stopped, leaving the road sparkling with light. We walked side by side in silence for a few minutes, listening to the sound of cars fading away and the wind blowing through the trees. Then her hand found mine. I squeezed it gently without saying anything. That feeling, simple but certain, was like a silent affirmation that we had chosen this path, despite the challenges, despite the fact that no one understood. I looked at Ellie. The yellow light fell on her face, brightening her eyes, which were still slightly worried, but also filled with peace. And in that moment I thought, I'm 26. She's 50. but together we both seemed to have found the youth and peace we had lost. We continued walking under the city lights, hand in hand, as if the whole wide world had shrunk to just the two of us. A different family, not yet complete, but enough to believe that happiness can still sprout in unexpected places. The author would like to express his deep gratitude to all readers who have accompanied the story until the last pages. Every moment you spend reading, listening, and feeling is a great source of motivation to help the stories continue to be written, to continue to live. Not only is it a creative journey, it is also a sharing journey where unexpected emotions, seemingly small vibrations, can touch the hearts of others. And that is the reason why Daily Unexpected Stories was born. To bring stories full of surprises, full of emotions beyond the usual framework. If you have found empathy, joy, or simply a few minutes of silence through this work, the author hopes that you will continue to accompany. Please subscribe to the Daily Unexpected Stories channel so as not to miss any new stories. Stories that can make you smile, cry, or reflect a little more on life. Once again, thank you very much. See you in the next Unexpected Stories.